Good evening. And what I want to do first of all is thank Mr. Weir for giving me the opportunity to speak on this topic. What I'm going to do is to fill in some of the gaps, given what Clyde said, but to give you in more detail what the 1990 to 92 recession was about, including the source, the response of the Barbadian government, and then to try and do a similar exercise for this recession, assuming that we have the time. Now, Clyde indicated that there were three features of the Barbadian economy that were important: smallness, openness, and vulnerability. And vulnerability is a direct result of the dependency nature of the economy. And when we say dependent, what we basically say is that external influences have a significant impact on national development policies. And for its entire economic history, the features of smallness, openness, and dependency have been there, and it is quite accurate to state that with the economic growth that has been experienced over the years, the economy has actually become more open and more dependent. And in general, when you begin to look at those three features, recognize that the openness and the dependency flow from the fact that the country is small, geographically has a limited natural resource base and a small population base. And because of those two, the openness, the smallness, a particular pattern emerges and dependency naturally follows. Okay, when we talk about openness and dependency though, recognize that all countries are characterized by some degree of openness and dependency, and that what matters most is the pattern of relationships, economic relationships that have evolved over the years between countries that are less open and less dependent and those that are more open and more dependent. And from time to time you've had various terms that have been used to describe that pattern of relationships. You hear terms such as dominant dependent, center periphery, or metropolitan satellite. But essentially any of those terms capture the essence of the relationship, which is best exemplified when attempts are made to reach global agreements on trade and related matters. That's a basic background. To understand, in addition to what Clyde said, to understand the fiscal position of government, there's some interesting issues about Barbados, interesting economic development that you should pay attention to, and I'm going to outline them as quickly as possible. Okay, the openness and dependency and so on, smallness, have had a significant impact. But in addition to those factors, there are particular features of the Barbadian economy that are distinguish it from other developing countries. Okay? One of the major set happens to be the political stability and maturity, the social stability and cohesion, and progressive social policies. Those three factors in themselves, particularly progressive social policies, have more or less led to what you can call an entrenchment of a sort in the way that they do certain types of public budgeting. Then you find three sets of economic factors, two sets of economic factors and one institutional factor. The institutional factor is that over the years we've had the establishment of a raft of government corporations to undertake functions not suited to the public service. And then we've had a particular set of fiscal incentives to promote investment. Those incentives have had a particular impact on current revenue. For example, by way of example, the tourism sector, which is the largest, pays to be less taxes in terms of corporate taxes, either gross or as a percentage. And then we've had the trade liberalization policies of the 1990s, and those have led to changes in the tax system that would of course have had an impact as well. Now, apart from those factors, you could basically look at how the country has performed, the developments that have taken place in the 65 years or so since the Second World War. The first thing that strikes you is that Barbados moved from a country with a per capita income of $205 in 1946 to along with the per capita income is now somewhere around $28,000. Okay? And one reason for that would have been the progressive set of social policies. The policies both contributed to the economic growth and development and were also a result of the economic growth and development which make this sustainability possible. And then by way of talking about the institutional structure, you have the establishment of National Housing Corporation, National Conservation, Conservation and so on. It's important to recognize that because those are the institutions that benefit from a lot of the transfers and subsidies that are in fact a problem in the current budget. And then we've had, as we pointed out earlier, the fiscal incentives aspect, which was necessary, has led to particular structure in the revenue system, and then we've had the trade liberalization policies. Now, all the things they've just said that took place, although they made Barbados better off, they also made the country more open and independent. And that is the paradox of the entire economic situation that we are dealing with. And given that they've made it more open and independent, it has therefore become more vulnerable to severe adverse economic shocks. And the aspect that contributes most to that enhanced vulnerability is the openness. Basically, as Clyde said, what the openness means is that we import a lot, we import most of our consumer final goods and most of the intermediate goods used by businesses. And also we export a significant part of our output, both in the form of what we call visible goods as well as invisible services, which is tourism. But one of the features of openness is that economic growth in Barbados is accompanied by rapid increases in imports. And to be able to finance those imports, significant attention has to be paid to the foreign exchange reserve position. If you don't, then even in good times you could run yourself in trouble. And then the other two challenges that we have to deal with are the challenges of the fiscal deficit and the balance of payments deficit. Now, it's important to recognize that those two challenges do not directly derive from the features of smallness, openness, and dependency, but in fact what happens is that if those twin deficits are not managed adequately, then they magnify the effects of smallness, openness, and dependency when you do have an adverse economic shock. So it's very, very important that you understand that managing those two deficits is terribly important. And basically, as Clyde pointed out, you can measure a fiscal deficit either on the current account or as a total measure, where the total measure basically says that the fiscal deficit is the difference between total government expenditure, where that is current plus capital expenditure, and less government revenue. Typically, government revenue is current, but it can also include capital revenue. What I would say is that the general principle with regard to fiscal deficits is that they are acceptable, but that they should not be excessive, okay? And we're talking about total fiscal deficits, not current account fiscal deficits. So the general principle is that total fiscal deficits are acceptable, but should not be excessive. And excessive fiscal deficits not only have distortionary economic effects, but they also lead to a burgeoning of the public debt since fiscal deficits are funded by bonds. And if fiscal deficits are excessive, they will naturally lead to a rapid increase in the public debt, possibly to unsustainable levels. And the level of public debt is said to be potentially unsustainable when the dollar amount of public debt as a percentage of gross domestic product or gross national product exceeds some generally accepted ratio. Now, with regard to the fiscal deficit in general, the practice in Barbados has been to aim for a current account surplus, and that current account surplus, along with bond, would then be used to finance the capital expenditure program. And what I would say is that with the exception of a few years, the achievement of current account surpluses have been the norm. In recent years, there's been an explosion in the public debt, and so much so that the public debt ratio has now surpassed the acceptable level. Now, so if we summarize it, we can say the following. Economic growth and development in Barbados has been associated with or resulted in a particular set of characteristics that have serious implications for the long-term management of the economy, as well as for responding to adverse economic shocks. These characteristics are as follows. The nature of the economic growth experience has made the economy more open and more dependent, and thus more vulnerable to adverse economic shocks. Unsustainable fiscal deficits and public debt ratios threaten the maintenance of the fixed exchange rate regime that is the cornerstone of macroeconomic policy. Capital inflows are an important source of maintaining balance of payments equilibrium. Approximately 50% of tax revenues are raised from indirect taxes. A significant percentage, approximately 40%, of government current expenditure occurs in the form of transfers and subsidies to government agencies and other institutions. and a significant percentage, approximately 30% of government current expenditure, occurs in the form of wages and subsidies, wages and salaries for public service.